GraphQL Conf. Awesome to be here. I hope you're having a fantastic day, enjoying the conference so far. And before I get into my talk, if you have any questions, I'm going to be around here, so drop anything in the chat or wherever, and we can have a conversation going on in between. And actually, I want to kick us off here and ask you a question. Why do you think GraphQL is so successful? Give you a minute to think about it. And then I'll tell you my reason. I think GraphQL is so successful because of the tooling. And in particular, the first tool that comes to my mind when I think about GraphQL is GraphQL or the GraphQL Playground, or like in general, a GraphQL IDE. Because after all, these are the portals for us GraphQL developers to interact with GraphQL, to use it, to try to explore it, and to send requests without needing to go full-scale programming. So I'm here today to talk to you a bit about the future of GraphQL IDEs. Quick facts about me. My name is Thomas. I can see my Twitter handle on the screen, can always find me there. I'm working at Stellate, formerly known as GraphCDN, and doing other GraphQL things there as well. So let's get into it. But before telling you anything about the future or even about the present, I want to tell you a bit about the past, give you a quick rundown about the history to know how we ended up where we are today. It all started back in 2015 when GraphQL itself was first open sourced by Facebook. It already came with the first version of GraphQL, the first GraphQL IDE. In fact, I think that this was a big reason for its early success, because developers could just try it out, just write in your browser, no need to set up anything or any tools or download 1,000 npm packages. Just go in the browser and just try out GraphQL. It was amazing. Then years passed and GraphQL adoption rose. And 2 years later, in 2017, a company called GraphQL released the GraphQL Playground, the next generation GraphQL IDE, which was targeted more for GraphQL power users. It came with a lot of new features that GraphQL didn't have back in the day, like automated schema reloading, tabs, a lot more options for configuration in general, and also a more modern design. Another milestone 1 year later was the VS Code extension for GraphQL, which further closed the gap between us developers writing GraphQL in their IDEs, VS Code in this case, and the language itself. Then some more years passed, 2 years more, and in 2020, the company GraphQL renamed to Prisma since and focused more on database tooling. So they handed over the Playground to the GraphQL Foundation. And now we are at the point where the two most popular IDEs, GraphQL and the Playground, are both under the same roof. And the question was, of course, okay, how will this move forward? And the plan was actually quite simple. The plan was to merge the Playground into GraphQL and create a new major version for GraphQL being the official GraphQL IDE. Well, it sounds simple, but it was actually quite the ambitious plan. So here we are again, 2 years later, 2022, and that's what I want to focus on today. What happened and what did we do around GraphQL version 2 and even beyond that? Before showing you anything, how it looks, what we did, I want to take a step back and ask the question, why? Why do we even need a new GraphQL? Why isn't the current one good enough? We asked ourselves this question and we had to think about what do the users of GraphQL actually need? And then we realized that there's no one GraphQL users. There are different kinds of users, each of which have different needs. For example, on day one, I don't know GraphQL yet. I'm just trying to learn it. That's my main purpose. I want a tool that supports me with that. I want the first, like this exciting feeling of the first GraphQL request that I just send to an API and get back a response. I want to have this moment of success, and I want to explore what does a GraphQL schema look like with its types and fields and everything. And I want to build up my understanding of GraphQL. Also from day one, basically no matter on which stage you are, GraphQL as a tool should always be accessible for everyone. We want to enable every developer to use it, no matter if you have perfect eyesight or not, or if you can use a mouse or a keyboard. Moving on day 10, I'm a different user now. I have understood how GraphQL works, and maybe I'm now in the process of developing my first GraphQL API. So I have different needs. Now I need a tool that supports me with that has efficient workflow, that has a fast feedback loop where I can iterate quickly over my schema and write queries to test it. And yet again, on day 100, I'm a different kind of user again. And until now, I probably have shipped my first GraphQL API. I have built a product around it, and hopefully it's successful and it grows. And with that growth comes growth for my API. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Like thinking about Meta, for example, it has probably thousands of types until now in their GraphQL schema. And the more I bet on GraphQL and GraphQL, the more need I will have eventually to customize it, to make it my own, to add my own functionality in it, to make it look and blend in with my product and with my brand. And maybe I also want to embed it in different places, not just using it as a standalone web app, but include it in my docs, for example, or even in blog posts. So we see a lot of different user needs. And we did one more iteration over this and basically thought about, okay, what are the design goals that we want to have for the future of GraphQL? The first one we came up with is user focus. In fact, I believe we don't came up with it. It was there from the start. GraphQL was always a very simple and lean tool that just gave you the bare minimums of the things you needed to get the job done. Tabs are a good example for this. On day one, I don't need tabs. I'm just like learning GraphQL. I just want to send one query and see what comes back. But on day 10 or day 100, I do need tabs. I do want to have this testing multiple queries at the same time. And we'll see later how we want to make that how we are trying to solve that. So user focus is definitely something that we want to keep. A learning we had from the playground and its success was that aesthetics also play a big role. Because the playground, I think, was quite successful because it had a more modern design compared to GraphQL. So we believe that a delightful UX is part of we believe that a delightful UI is part of a good developer experience. Discoverability is another point here. No matter what I'm doing in my IDE, I want that it supports me right where I am. When I write a query, I want to see which fields are available to me at this point. If I want to know more details for a specific field or type or whatever, I should just be able to click through easily to the documentation to get more details about it. And last but not least, no matter if I have a big or a small schema, the IDE should always be responsive. It should be super fast. When I give it a task, I want it to be basically done instantly. I don't want to wait for it. I want to move on. I want to have as fast as feedback as possible. So I know you all want to probably see finally what GraphQL 2 is all about, but bear with me. I also want to quickly tell you what we actually did to make it happen. And for context, when we started out working towards the next major version, the state was that GraphQL, all its code was basically one monolithic set of React components living in a single package. And thinking back to the design goals and the user needs, this wasn't cutting it for us. We wanted something that was more flexible and more composable. And that's where the idea of the package called GraphQL React was born. This should basically be a package that contains individual building blocks that make up a GraphQL IDE like GraphQL. That means contexts for state management, hooks to consume contexts and to work with the state and to modify it, and also UI components ranging from very simple design primitives like buttons up to more complex and bigger but still reusable components like, for example, the query editor or the docs. After we set up this new package, we could start breaking up GraphQL. In particular, we started breaking up the state management part of GraphQL into individual context providers. This was one big refactoring, which we managed to do without breaking changes actually. And we already released it in GraphQL version 1. And it was nothing that users needed to care about actually. But then the next step, that's the one where we had to start to breaking changes. It was the design refresh. We basically implemented a new design from the ground up, and we really worked together with designers to come up with a design that really encapsulates all these design goals that I showed you on the previous slide. And last but not least, we actually noticed quite late that we need this, was a plugin API. We realized we needed this because actually GraphQL version 1 already has plugins. There's one very particular plugin that was quite popular, or is quite popular, which is the GraphQL Explorer from OneGraph. And a lot of implementations of GraphQL use the Explorer, and we wanted to have a path for these implementations to also upgrade to version 2. So we needed a way or a place where we could include these kind of like plugins. So we came up with a very simple but yet quite powerful plugin API that leveraged the new structure given to us by the new design. If I would need to sum it up in 2 sentences, what the current state of GraphQL is, then it would be something like this. The GraphQL package is becoming the reference implementation for a GraphQL IDE. It leverages a set of building blocks that will allow other users to build their own customized IDEs with ease. These building blocks coming from the GraphQL React package. But enough for me talking and drum rolls, because it's time I actually show you what GraphQL version 2 is all about. So I'm gonna jump into my demo. I have prepared a empty React app. I bootstrapped that with Vite, and the only thing I really did was adding some dependencies, mainly adding GraphQL React, adding the GraphQL package, also the GraphQL React package, a package called GraphQL Toolkit, which is for utilities, and the GraphQL package is more or less, or it's just a peer dependency of GraphQL. So let's start this up and open this in my browser, and you see hello GraphQL Conf, because that's all I rendered. So let's get started and get GraphQL on this page. And it's almost as easy as importing it from the package, almost, because it needs one additional prop, which is called a fetcher. A fetcher is just a function that fetches a GraphQL request, and you can easily create such a fetcher using the create GraphQL fetcher function from the toolkit package. And I'm just going to pass this in as a prop here. And the only other thing we need is to also import the style sheet from GraphQL. And here we are. This is GraphQL version 2 in its glory. So let's give it a try and write a simple query. I'm using the Star Wars API, so I'm just gonna query all Star Wars films. And as you see me typing, you also see what you know and love, getting type ahead for the fields that are available to me. But not just that, we made it even better, because if I start cycling through these fields, I also immediately and more prominently see which type is this field going to return, and I'm also seeing the description of the type. So let's just query the ID and the title for now and run this query. And here we are, getting a response as we're used to. So let's say I want to now have more details about the Empire Strikes Back. I could start writing another query in here, but actually, wouldn't it be great if we had tabs? And in fact, we do have tabs. Also, if you don't see them yet, because one of the design goals we had, keeping the user focus. As long as I'm just writing my one query, I don't need tabs. But now that I do, I can simply open up another tab. And now the tab bar appears, and I can start writing my second query. And let's just do this using a variable here and query an individual film. Let's get the title, and let's also get the characters from that movie. Just fetching the name. And as you know and love, below the query editor, I can enter my variables, passing in the ID that I copied from the other query. And if I run that, I get my response. And if I switch between tabs, all the editor contents are preserved between switching. Also, the actions, if I want to quickly modify the query here, or I could just copy it here or prettify it, these buttons have been moved here next to the query editor below the execution button. So, diving a bit more into customization now. What if I really, really like this design, but I want to make it blend in with my brand? How can I make that happen? Well, it's actually quite easy to do, because all the design tokens used for the new design are just CSS variables. So if I want to apply a new theme, all I need to do is override a bunch of color variables. In this case, we're using HSL values, so hue, saturation, and lightness. Saving that, switching over, and it's as easy as that. Now I get GraphQL in a whole new coat of paint, and everything still works. It's as easy as that. So that's really exciting for me, because this was one of the things which was basically impossible to do in version 1. And now it's super easy. If this is getting you excited and you think, wow, now I can finally implement my own dark theme for GraphQL, then you're thinking the same thing that we did. So we built it in. GraphQL version 2 now ships with a dark theme out of the box. One of the most requested features we had, and now it's finally here. And it's not just inverting colors. We try to make sure that the contrasts look good, that it feels good, that it really is usable. But switching back to the light theme for the presentation now. And let's dive into plugins. You see a new sidebar here on the left, where we have a bunch of different buttons. In particular, we have the docs, which haven't really changed compared to version 1. So it's just the old docs in a new coat of paint. And we also have the history, where I can quickly switch between past queries. But we took some inspiration from tools like VS Code. If you look at VS Code, you also have the sidebar here. And if I install more extensions, I get more icons here. And these icons open up additional functionality in this content here, in this pane here on the left. And we thought about, why don't we do the same thing for GraphQL? So we did. What we did is we added a prop called plugins to GraphQL, where you can pass your own list of plugins that will show up in the sidebar. And so let's just create one for the demo. And what we'll do is creating an AST explorer. So basically, we want to take the query that we just wrote and show its parsed AST. And to make sure I'm defining this correctly, I can use the GraphQL plugin type, which comes from GraphQL React. But it's very simple anyways. The only things I need is a title an icon, which is a React component that will render in the sidebar. I'm just going to choose a quite generic one for the sake of demo. And content is another React component, which will render the contents into the plugin pane here on the left side. So let's create this component quickly. For now, let's just return some text. And actually passing in the plugin as prop. And here it is, new icon in the sidebar. And if I click it, the new plugin shows up. So all we need to do is make it functional, right? So how do we do that? I mentioned that all the state lives now in context providers. And if I want to do something with the editors, I want to get the value of the query editor, I can use the editor context just by using a hook from GraphQL React called use editor context. And this gives me access to the query, or like it gives me access to the query editor, which has a method called getValue, where I can get the value from. And to prove to you that this actually works, I'm just gonna render the query in here. And it shows up here on the left side in my plugin pane. And if I change the query, prettify it, or add any more fields to it, it automatically updates here, which is exactly what I want. So all we need to do is now parse the query. So let's quickly do that. This is gonna return a document node. I'm gonna initialize it to null. We have to be a bit safe here because parsing might throw an error. So if we have a query value, we can use the parse function from GraphQL, parse that query, and if that fails, we just do nothing. And now, conditionally, if we have a parsed query, we are gonna show the parsed query. We're gonna do a JSON stringify for simple formatting, as this is an object. And if we have no query, then we're just going to say query cannot be parsed. And that's it. Works. I see my parsed query here on the left. If I switch between queries or I do anything that alters the query, I see it, the AST updating on the left. And if I make something invalid, it says query cannot be parsed. All right. That's how simple and easy it is now to add plugins to GraphQL that contain your own functionality. And there's one last thing I want to show you. What we did here was basically creating a full-blown React application that needs a build step in order to generate static assets, which is kind of maybe a bit overhead for if I just want to get GraphQL running. So what you could do with GraphQL version 1 and what you can still do is just using a that simple HTML file. I'm going to remove the script here, and I'm actually going to open up the HTML file, which is completely empty right now. And all I need to do now is load some stuff, in particular React and GraphQL, from a CDN like unpackage in this case. Just going to put the style sheet in the head. I'm also going to add the global styles that we had in our Vite setup. And now everything I need to do is render GraphQL. And I can do that with the globals that are available after loading these scripts. So I'd say React DOM render and React create element. GraphQL is also global now after loading the GraphQL script, and it actually needs the fetcher prop. And I'm gonna need to specify the element, and I'm just gonna copy over the fetcher we had in here. And instead of create GraphQL fetcher, I get the same method, not as global, but I can say GraphQL create fetcher. And now, moment of truth, I reload, and Here it is, the same graphical functional as it was before. No build step, that simple, one HTML file. All right, that concludes my demo. Jumping back into my slides and throwing in a party emoji because I'm very happy that I got through my demo unharmed, and I hope I got you maybe a bit excited about GraphQL version 2. So coming back to the title of my talk. I titled my talk The Future of GraphQL IDEs. And in a sense, the future is now. GraphQL version 2 is here, it's released, it's for you to use. But it's not the end of the road for GraphQL. We still have some more ideas how we can make it even better in the future, and I want to also talk about these quickly. The first thing is Monaco. Monaco is the code editor that powers VS Code. And we want to use it to replace the code mirror editor, which we are using currently in GraphQL. This will have quite some benefits. It will give users a more familiar editing experience with all the known shortcuts you know and love from VS Code. But more importantly, it will also provide better accessibility. And we hope to also squeeze some better performance out of it, as Monaco is running inside a web worker. The second thing I want to mention is the GraphQL Explorer. I mentioned this before as one of the popular plugins, basically for GraphQL version 1. And we have plans of actually building this right into GraphQL as its own plugin. It's heavily inspired by the OneGraph Explorer, of course, but we want to make it even better, even more easy and intuitive to use as a visual way to build your query. I want to show you a screenshot from a design that we had when designing the version 2 of GraphQL. And here on the left, you can see a concept for this Explorer, where you have the tree of all fields and their nested subfields, and can basically include or exclude them into your query just by triggering a checkbox. And not just that, we went beyond that and tried to integrate the documentation right inside this tree view. You already see the type and the fields, the type and the description next to the fields. And we even have some more ideas around how we can make this an even better experience. If you're interested, chime into the discussions in our GraphQL repository, whereas there's one about design where you can find more details around this effort. And the last thing I want to mention, again, plugins, even more plugins. We noticed that there's an opportunity to have even more places in the new design where you can include plugins and add your own functionality. I want to quickly show this. This is like a schematic view of the new GraphQL design. Here on the left, you see the plugin pane, which is already available in GraphQL version 2. So you can already use this to include your own plugins. But there is more. Beneath the query editor, you know the variable and headers editors, which help you write your GraphQL query. And we started thinking about this as a more generic section where you can add different kinds of tools that help you with that effort. And similarly, on the right side, beneath the response, there's also the possibility of adding more content that show you more details about the response, like, for example, headers or something specific to the API you're building. So, after all this talking and this demo, how can you take action? I want to leave you with that at the end. You can install GraphQL version 2 now. It's released. You can just get started with all the new features that I showed you today. If you are already using GraphQL version 1, look out for a migration guide that we put together in our repository that will help you with upgrading. It highlights all the breaking changes and helps that it goes as smooth as possible. You can go beyond that. You can build your own IDE. The GraphQL React package is also already out there. You can just install it and start using it. The best reference for how to use it is probably the GraphQL package itself and how it uses the building blocks from GraphQL React to create the GraphQL UI I just gave you a demo for. Always ask questions if you dive into any of this and you get stuck, you have feedback, you have ideas. Let us know. We are always happy to hear them. Just join the GraphQL Discord server. I put a QR code with an invite if you're not already in there. We have a graphical channel there, and you can join us there. And if you find any issues, then don't hesitate to report them in our GitHub repository. Also left you a QR code with a link to that. We have an eye out for issues specific to the version 2 release. So if anything comes up, we hope that we can fix any bugs quickly. And yeah, all that is left for me to say is thank you very much for listening to my talk. You can see my socials here on the bottom. You can find me on Twitter or on GitHub. You can also find me at Stellate, where I work on other GraphQL stuff apart from GraphQL. And yeah, that's all I have for you. Enjoy the rest of the conference and have an awesome day.